And good afternoon to whoever's out there already from a very, dare I say, grey day in Pittsburgh. Very wet, very grey, and quite chilly considering what we've had for the last few weeks. Anyway, hope you're all well. And here we are, Marlene. You need your bumper shoot today. It's hello, Greg. I'm looking forward to this one. This is quite fun, actually. The sonnets being such particular favorites of mine. But anyway, no, like I say, it's a positively chilly day, a grey day, not a day for gardening and things, which has been my excuse for exercise for a while. Hello, James in White Oak. David, there you are. Welcome. I hope it's been a nicer day over there. Hello, Grace. Yes. A little bit of alliteration in the title is always a nice thing. But then again, alliteration is a fundamental within sonnets, but I'll be coming to that. I hope everybody, as I say, I hope everybody is remaining well and healthy. We were just discussing a moment ago that just about, I think everybody in the circle of Picked Classic Theatre is now not only fully vaccinated, but in fact beyond their restriction date. So we can all go around and look at one another, which is very comforting and very pleasant. Haven't had a proper look at some of them for quite a while. Hello, Debbie. Welcome to you too, and Linda. And Helen. A day for poetry. Every day is a day for poetry. There should be a little poetry in every day. I always say that. And some of us are the very poetry that the day should contain. Where have the sonnets been read for public sharing? I think, actually, that if you go onto Google, you will find various sites that will have readings of the sonnets. I seem to remember years ago, although it was long before the internet, John Gielgud did a whole film, I suppose then, of the sonnets, which were for their day quite beautiful, although I think I would find them slightly ponderous now. And I'll explain why during the course of the webinar. But I think there are various actors at some point have done some of the sonnets. I don't know whether anybody's done all of the sonnets. I feel Gielgud did. Patrick Stewart. Who else? Patrick Stewart has recorded all of the sonnets. That's right, because it was on Facebook or something.
It was on his socials all last summer.
All last summer, yes. He was pumping out. I'm reliably informed by my colleague, who is the source of all knowledge and wisdom, that this is true. Yes, I recall seeing some of them. So, Greg, in answer to your question, check out Patrick Stewart. I think he recorded every single one of them. Hello, Karen from Squirrel Hill. And hello, Dennis. I hope it's brighter out where you are than it is here. Yoke. Thank you, Yoke. The Ibsen was rather interesting. And as I say, Marty and I are going to do over the summer, we'll be doing 2 or 3 more on Ibsen, doing some comparative studies of the play. I think one of the things we'd like to look at, for instance, would be to consider A Doll's House together with Hedda Gabler, and these 2 women who in different ways are trapped in the environment to which they have been either born or married or both. So we will be coming back to Ibsen. I hope people enjoyed it, because both Marty and I agree about one thing, and that is Ibsen is an incredibly entertaining playwright with a wonderful sense of ironic humor. And so often you hear people say, oh, well, Ibsen's dreary. Like people say Shakespeare's difficult, which we all now know Shakespeare's easy. So as I say, yes, we will be coming back to Ibsen. And we've got actually some very interesting material lined up over the next month, but I'll come to that later on. Hello, Pat from Oakland, and Robert. Back in Pittsburgh, were you away? Yes, it is freezing here. James, hello from Crafton, how are you? Anybody who says it's freezing here was obviously in Florida or somewhere, for whom I have little sympathy. Because if you're running off to get warmth during the winter, maybe tough it out like us. Mind you, if I could afford it, I'd probably do the same. Anyway, it's actually not been a bad spring. I'm having a little cold snap now, but it's not been bad. We shouldn't complain. And we will be complaining very soon when it gets very, very hot. And we'll all be moaning about it. How are we doing? Oh, my goodness me. Time is passing, so I think we better get started. So, positively perfect poems. I suppose one might say that it is particularly pretentious of me to recommend positively perfect poems, in that nothing in this world is positively perfect. But I couldn't resist the alliteration, particularly on the particular topic of which I'm going to speak. So let's start with an example. Now, a sonnet is a poem, but it is also an expression. And poetry written by a playwright usually demands to be heard as much as read. And as I think I've said before, and probably endlessly, we have two languages, the language that we read and the language we speak. And the two don't necessarily instantly align. For instance, we don't pronounce words very often the way they're written. So when you read these poems aloud, when you read sonnets aloud, you begin to realize that the sound value of them and the rhythm of them is as important to the demonstration of the word. I'll come back to that point in a moment. And there's another aspect to the sonnets of Shakespeare, or indeed any other Elizabethan writer, which I also want to allude to without making it too heavy. But let's take a simple example of probably one of the best known. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines by chance or nature's changing course undimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Now, aside from the fact that, in my opinion, it's rather a beautiful piece of poetry, I think it's an almost perfect sonnet because it exemplifies so many points within the concept of the sonnet as a piece of poetry, and therefore as a piece of communication, and therefore as a piece of theater, because it is a conversation. It is a person talking to a person and using all the fundamental intrinsic points of what makes a perfect sonnet a perfect poem. The rhythms, the alliterations, the repetitions. I'm going to come to all of these. The use of repetition, but with a change of meaning. For instance, in that little moment there, sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines. Every fair from fair. It's a brilliant use of one word, and it's a brilliant use of construction. So let's move on from that point. It is an exquisite sonnet. Shakespeare wasn't just, you see, a master at the art of playwriting. He was a remarkable poet. In other words, he was a remarkable writer. And whichever form he chose, he could do it magnificently. He wrote some extraordinary verse sagas, such as the Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucretia, both of which I heartily recommend you read. Take your time, read it, and read it aloud. It will make such a difference to you. But his true genius as a poet is best seen in, and probably best loved in, these remarkable sonnets. There are 154 of them. I defy you to write 154 perfect sonnets. And they celebrate love, life, age, and regret. All of that. But almost all of them also demonstrate another important thing, the human capacity for hope. And as a demonstration of the poetic form of the sonnet, they are unsurpassed. Nobody ever produced that many so well. And he's not the only sonnet writer by any means, but the sheer volume and clarity of these is quite extraordinary. So I want to also draw on some other writings of that period, and particularly the very much revered King James Bible, and also the Book of Common Prayer, which is positively Shakespearean in the beauty of the use of language, both of these books. So why do I turn to the Bible and or the biblical and the clerical, as it were, the Bible of James's translation and the Book of Common Prayer? Well, we all know that the Bible and the Book of Common Prayer were revised under the instructions of King James I. Hence, we have the King James Bible. In the time of Henry VIII, Cranmer, and shortly afterwards, created, to replace the Catholic Missal, created this Book of Common Prayer for the Church in England, which became the Church of England, which we now know as the Episcopalian Church. Henry VIII had commissioned a Bible in English, which was known as the Great Bible. And there were various sources for these, but King James wanted to bring it together into a more comprehensible and better produced and what I think what he might have described as more poetically perfect piece. Alliteration again. Certainly, the result, the King James Bible, is now probably the most quoted. I mean, we all know lines from the Bible, but the lines that we tend to remember are the ones that were written in the King James Version. They weren't just translated, they were recomposed. And they were recomposed by writers of tremendous skill with language, poetic abilities. It's even been suggested that Shakespeare himself may have had a hand in some of the writing. No, don't get on to me. Whether that's true or not, I haven't a clue. I really can't say, I don't know. But certainly, his style of writing, which may be considered as the style of the time. I mean, most playwrights, most writers were writing in iambic pentameter at that point, before Shakespeare and after Shakespeare. So that stylistic is in some event evident in the composition of both books, both the Bible and the Book of Common Prayer. If you look at the prayer book of the Church in and of England, composed originally by Archbishop Canterbury Cranmer, when it was revised, it produced some of the most exquisite use of language. The prayers, commonly known as the collects, are truly poetic. They are poems of prayer, or prayers through poetry. They may not be in verse, but they are poetry in their own right. I mean, they're supplications in the form poetical. Look at this. This is just something I just looked up one of the collects. O Lord Jesus Christ, who at thy first coming did send thy messenger to prepare thy way before thee. Look at that phrase, to prepare thy way before thee. The rhythm of that line. Grant that the ministers and stewards of thy ministries may likewise so prepare and make ready thy way by turning the hearts of the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. That is poetry. I'm not remotely discussing religion here, by the way. Please do not assume that this is a religious exercise. I'm talking about language. That at thy second coming to judge the world we may be found an acceptable people in thy sight. Now, it's elaborate, it's Elizabethan, but it's beautifully rhythmic. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to read on. It's not pedantic, it's poetic. Look at this one. And again, phrases that we know and love. Almighty God, who out of the mouths of babes and sucklings hath ordained strength. Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, the rhythm of that is superb. And made infants to glorify thee by their deaths, mortify and kill all vices in us, and so strengthen us by thy grace, that by the innocency of our lives, not because we are innocent, by the innocency of our lives. That is a beautiful poetic phrase. And constancy of our faith even unto death. That could, if that was written in Shakespeare, you would assume that that was a piece of playwriting and a piece of poetry. Take the book of Psalms. Again, from the James Bible, most people know this version of this particular psalm. It's in different forms, but this is the one that most people will immediately recognize. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What a perfect line. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'll need nothing. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. That is so beautiful. That is poetry. That is somebody in a state of absolute oneness with nature. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And the great one, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Hamlet could have said that. Or the following psalm, that's Psalm 23, from Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and all that dwell therein. I mean, you could hear that as a line in a play and assume it was just a piece of drama. It's poetry. It is not simply a translation of what was written a couple of thousand, 2,500 years ago. It's actually a piece of poetry in itself. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. It's absolutely beautiful. It's poetry. And it's the kind of poetry that the writers of the time were interested in. The use of a phrase and the structure of the phrase and the placing of the words to allow this perfect and hypnotic, almost seductive rhythm. These are not just prayers and supplications, they are poetry. And they could easily be formed into the most perfect poetic style, the sonnet. Look at the writing in the Gospels. Now, this one is from the Gospel of John and is probably one of the better known quotes in the whole Bible. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Now, again, nothing to do with religion, but look at what that does. That poem, that 4-verse poem in itself is seductive and attractive. The rhythms appeal to you. You want to read on. And the life was the light of men. Oh, where's this leading me? That's theater. That's drama. That's good poetry. That first line is pure poetry. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's intriguing. It's so deep. It requires, and it's something people have written philosophies on this, but it is pure poetry. Now, there is within this considerable use of the three poetic forms that attract me within the sonnets: the list, alliteration, and repetition. And the whole thing is in itself very close to iambic pentameter. The same was in the beginning with God. The same was in the beginning with God. You got three iambic beats there. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Slightly short of it. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. That's iambic. Now, that formulation of language as was commissioned for the Bible and for the Book of Common Prayer, two things that by then, by law, everyone was allowed to read, the idea of a Bible in the vernacular, the Bible in English. What James did and his commissioners was to make those two books of religion easily accessible, easy to read, to make them almost story-like. We talk about, the Gospels as the greatest story ever told. And whatever your set of beliefs, the same with the Old Testament, whatever your set of beliefs, I'm not concerned. But in the composition of the James Bible and the Book of Common Prayer, a story was being told through poetic form to make you want to read it, to make you want to follow it. In other words, those very clever commissioners and that very clever king and those very clever writers managed to make something that was huge and complex accessible through the use of language, through the use of poetry. And the reason I think that we can see evidence of this in Shakespeare's sonnets is because that's the formula, that's the same formula that he used to the level of sheer genius. Look at another of his sonnets that is, as I say, it's not about religion, but it's about, just think of that same concept. When I consider everything that grows holds in perfection but a little moment, that this huge stage presenteth naught but shows, whereon the stars in secret influence comment, when I perceive that men, as plants, increase, cheered and checked even by the self-same sky, vaunt in their youthful sap, at height decrease, and wear their brave state out of memory. Then the conceit of this inconstant stay sets you most rich in youth before my sight, where wasteful time debateth with decay to change your day of youth to sullied night. And all in war with time for love of you, as he takes from you, I engraft anew. Now, that is a love poem. It is a poem saying, no matter how old you get, I still love you, because in my sight you are always youthful. But it is also, you could replace God there, or a God concept. Because everything that grows dies, everything that blossoms fades, everything that comes to a maturity then fades to an obscurity. But and time is the denominator there. But for that creature which loves can engraft anew, can make new again. Here, I think Shakespeare in his sonnet is using that very religious concept that life is a constant renewal. And whether it be God, whether it be providence, whether it be nature, or whether it be the lover, it is exactly that same process, and he is using exactly the same form of language to express this. Look at this one. It's almost like a sermon on life. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble dear heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope with what I most enjoy, contented least. Yet, in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising, from sullen earth sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love, remembered, such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Again, within that, it's a sermon on life. Yes, it's a poem. Yes, it's a guy saying, no matter how miserable I feel, no matter how much I wish I was somebody else, no matter how bored I am with myself, no matter how rotten it all is, all I have to do is sit and look at you, and I'm so happy I'm me. Okay, a fundamental love poem, but there is a deeper meaning to that, and it comes back to that same notion that the church would say, when you think upon God, you are content. It's actually quite a religiously conservative poem, as well as being quite a beautiful love poem from a person to another person. But it's taking those same rhythms and feelings and suggestions and drawing you into that story so that you think somewhat deeper than just the materialistic. He does write one or two, actually, gloriously materialistic poems in this sonnet sequence, and I'll come to those in a while. But that one I think is a wonderful example of doing a sermon on life and at the same time making it a sermon on love. Let me go back to the Book of Common Prayer for a second. Man that is born of woman hath but a short time to live, and is full of misery. He cometh up, and is cut down like a flower. He fleeth as it were a shadow, and never continueth in one stay. In the midst of life we are in death. Of whom where we seek for succor, but of thee, O Lord, who for our sins art justly displeased. Now that is very, I don't know if you get it, and maybe I'm not explaining it clearly enough, but there is within that statement very similar images to the sonnet I've just read. That we are miserable, we're rotten, we're full of rubbish, but if you think about religion, if you think about faith, if you think about heaven, if you think about God, you realize the futility of our stupid feelings, and that we should be much more content with the realities of life and death. Man that is born of woman hath but a short time to live, and is full of misery. He cometh up and is cut down like a flower. We've had that in two poems already. Or this one. This is the committal of the dead. Unto Almighty God we commend the soul of our brother departed, and we commit his body to the ground. Here's the phrase: earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's rather beautiful. Sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life. So that notion, that's poetic. We commit the body to the ground. Earth to earth. We are made of dust were you born, and to dust you shall return, in the sure and certainty of resurrection. That's poetical. That is a poem of faith, not simply a prayer. Now, anyone can write a sonnet. It's such a simple form. 14 lines of iambic pentameter, with the final two being a rhyming couplet. Dead simple. I've often used this example. It's really great each week to be with you. Is a line of iambic pentameter. We do it all the time. Iambic pentameter is dead easy because it is the natural rhythm of spoken English. And if you were to analyze, if you carried a recorder around and analyzed the basic conversations you have throughout the day, I guarantee you will find dozens of lines of iambic pentameter there in the way you speak. That's our natural rhythm of speech if you speak English. So anybody can write it. But there are certain demands at which Shakespeare excelled if you're going to write sonnets. Specificity. The ability to focus the reader or the listener on the specific point or moment of thought. And that's the point I was making about the translation of the James Bible in the Book of Common Prayer. To focus the reader or the listener on the specific point or moment of thought. After all, poetry is actually thought made into words. That's what poetry is. And the truly great poets have great ideas and manage to put them down on paper in a way that we can share not their words, but their thoughts. So the placement of words is vital to the understanding of the thought. I'm going to give you a slightly silly example, but I think it's a moment of genius on my part. There was a popular song a few years back concerning the topic of first acquaintance, when somebody made their first acquaintance with another person and the effect it had upon them. But the songwriter did not write the song with the first line, "The first time I ever saw your face." The writer wrote something far better. "The first time ever I saw your face." It's all about putting the correct emphasis on the right syllable or the right word. I'm often nagging my own students about don't put the incorrect emphasis on the wrong syllable. If you make the thing sound right, you can direct the attention of the listener more precisely to the thought. And look at the difference between, by just juxtaposing two words, the first time I ever saw your face, the first time ever I saw your face. That ever in the right place changes the whole context of the emotion behind the line. And that's the importance of using words with tremendous specificity. Sorry, I can't speak. To be specific about the placement of a word places the thought. And in terms of sonnet construction, where you only have 14 lines, you must be specific. You can't go rambling on and try to work your way around to the idea. The idea must be specific, must be focused. Then there is the use of alliteration, which is the repetition of sound to focus the thought. If we take Sonnet 30, when to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends, hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan at the expense of many a vanished sight. There can I grieve of grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore bemoaned moan, which I knew pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. Right, lovely poem. The first 3 lines of that particular sonnet, in the first 3 lines, S is repeated 9 times. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh. Just to that point, 9 S sounds. There's a reason for it. Because there's something seductive. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past. You're being pulled in by it. Then the O sound takes the lead, and that is repeated in one form or another 12 times. and with old woes, new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep again love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then I can grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore bemoaned moan, which I and you pay as if not paid before. 12 times the O sound. And what is used 11 times. Now you may say, well, that's me, you know what, so what? Well, because those sounds, the repetition of those sounds draws you to them. The woes, new wail, my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for precious friends hidden death faceless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe. These repetitions of sounds are seductive. Sound is seductive, and we respond to it. I mean, even on that simple level that, you know, there are some people that you'd really like to get no more, but the sound of their voice just drives you insane. I hope I'm not doing that. So the use of sound, first the specificity of the word, then the use, the alliteration, the use of particular sounds to either to be seductive, to be gentle, or to grate, to those hard guttural sounds, which arrest your attention. The use of alliteration is not casual. It is a deliberated attempt to put particular sounds into your imagination, because we respond to sound. The written word on the page doesn't do it. It is the sound of those words that do it. Then there is the use of lists and repetition. And to demonstrate that, this is one particular sonnet that I recognize and reflect upon, because as the first line will explain, as a decrepit father takes delight to see his active child do deeds of youth, do deeds of youth, do deeds. So I, made lame by fortune's dearest sprite, take all my comfort of thy worth and truth, thy worth and truth. For whether beauty, birth, or wealth, or wit, a list with a double alliteration. For whether beauty, birth, or wealth, or wit, or any, all of these, or all, or more. Look at that. Now this is what I mean about specificity, condensing a sequence of thoughts, the use of alliteration, or any of these all the things I've mentioned, or all of them, or more of them, brought down into that simple structure, or any all of these, or any of these all, or more, entitled in thy parts to crowned sit, I make my love engrafted to this store. So then I am not lame, poor, nor despised, not lame, poor, or despised, whilst that this shadow doth such substance give, that I in thy abundance am sufficed. I am sufficed. I'm full. It's great. But look at the use of the alliteration. That I in thy abundance am sufficed, and by a part of all thy glory live. Look, what is best, that best I wish in thee. Look, listen to me, come here to me. Look, what is best, that best I wish in thee. This wish I have, then 10 times happy be. That is a glorious piece of poetry. It is the wish of age for youth, and that youth can make me happy because everything that I might wish for is represented by you. It's a beautiful poem, but it's also so beautifully constructed. And sometimes you can't see it if you just read it on the page. But when you listen to the use of sound, the way he uses sound, the way he uses repetition, the ways and the specificity of the placement of the words, this is magnificent. There's the use of the you and me. Very often, excuse me, I don't normally read as much poetry on these things. An awful lot of love poetry, and these are mostly about love as well as life. It is about the exchange of ideas, me to you, you to me. And he plays on that rather brilliantly in this one. Take all my loves, my love. Yea, take them all. Look at that. Take all my loves, my love. What a brilliant, again, use of the repetition to mean two different things. Take all my loves, my love. Yea, take them all. What hast thou then? Alliteration. What hast thou then? More than thou hadst before. No love, my love, that thou mayst true love call. No love, my love, that thou. All mine was thine before thou hadst this more. If I give you more, if you take more from me, you've already got it. All mine was thine before thou hadst this more. The internal rhyme is really important there. All mine was thine. Then if for my love thou my love receivest, I cannot blame thee for my love thou usest. I cannot blame thee for my love thou usest. He's playing wonderful word games on the concept of me and you. Me and you. The poem is about me and you. Later on in it, if thou thyself, we're talking about you, if thou thyself deceivest by willful taste of what thyself refusest, I do forgive thy robbery, gentle thief, although thou steal thee all my poverty. Thou steal thee, you are taking for yourself, thou steal thee. And yet love knows it is a greater grief to bear love's wrong than hate's unknown injury. Lascivious grace, in whom all ill well shows, kill me with sprites, yet we must not be foes. You can do whatever you like to me, but let's not be enemies. I've given you everything I have. You can't take more than the more I've already given you. It's again, within that, the constant use of you and me, thee and thou, thy, constant repetition of that concept brings it down to the particular, to, dare I say, the very personal. This is not about something general. If you, there's this on this particular topic, he addresses rather beautifully this vexed question that all of us experience, that we want to be loved in spite of, and sometimes because of, our imperfections. In a sense, he has a whole sequence of pieces on what we might call the marriage of true minds, and no, not yet. Your love and pity doth the impression fill which vulgar scandal stamped upon my brow. Now, we absolutely price the specificity of the word. Your love and pity doth the impression fill, the hollow, the hole, which vulgar scandal stamped upon my brow. In other words, your love and your pity covers up the nasty stuff that's said about me. For what care I who calls me well or ill? So you or green my head. Oh, look at that. So long as you or green my head, you plant fresh. Where somebody dug out a divot, you put the grass back. For what care I who calls me well or ill, so you, o'er green my bad, my good allow. In other words, whatever is said about me, bad, you all agree my bad, my good allow. You see the good in me. You are my all the world. Oh, I love that phrase. You are my all the world. And I must strive to know my shames and praises from your tongue. Only you can actually tell me what I'm really like. You can say anything to me because your opinion of me is the only one that matters. You are my all the world. I would have given anything to be able to write a line like that. And I must strive to know my shames and praises from your tongue. None else to me, nor I to none alive that my steel sense or changes right or wrong. Nobody else. In so profound abysm I throw all care of others' voices, that my adder's sense to critic and to flatterer stop it are. Don't listen to anybody else. Mark how with my neglect I do dispense. You are so strongly in my purpose bred, that all the world besides methinks are dead. This is a magnificent statement of you love me in spite of my imperfections. And because of that, only your opinion matters to me. Because not only do you see the good in me, but you see the bad and you take it and you accept it. This is a beautiful declaration of love, real love, the marriage, as it were, of true minds. And on that topic of true minds, this is probably the truest sermon ever written on the topic, and I bring us back to that reflection upon prayer and the effect of the use of language and why poets were chosen, because this is a sermon. It's almost biblical on the topic of marriage. Let me not, to the marriage of true minds, admit impediment. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no. It is and that is brilliant. Oh no. That is a person talking. This is a statement. It is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks with his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. And again, he is using this notion of marriage, but it's let it be said, this is not the biblical notion of the indissolubility of marriage. This is about the eternal reality of a true marriage of minds, rather than what was at the time the more common arranged marriage of property and wealth. People were married off because the woman had a dowry or the man had land or property. It was a business arrangement, and the church at the time dealt with it as a business arrangement. And this whole question of divorce was an interpretation. There are those, and I don't want to get into religion at all, but I think what he is referring to here is again that notion of what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. But the fact that you stand in front of a priest or a pastor or a vicar or a judge or anybody else doesn't mean God agreed. God agrees when it is a marriage of true minds. And this, I think, is his point. It is not merely a pledge of love, but it's basically a statement of understanding about what the true relationship between two people should be. If it is a marriage, it is a marriage of true minds. And if it is a marriage of true minds, what you look like, what you own, what you possess, what your favorite movie is irrelevant. What matters is that two minds together see nothing but each other and are committed to nothing but each other, regardless of what time and events can do. This is a sermon. So an awful lot of these are about love, and a lot of them are romantic. Now, the first, I think it's 14, 15. He wrote to a young man, a very beautiful young man. I think that was the mysterious WH of the sonnets. A young man who he was so beautiful that the poet wants him to marry and get married and have children, to keep this beauty that he has, to pass it on to another generation. In other words, the beauty is so perfect, it will fade. And it is this wonderful realization he's teaching us all the time, that beauty fades, life fades. It must be passed forward. It's got to be, whatever gift you have must be paid forward, which is a great fundamental truth about life and art and poetry and everything else. It's not just wealth that you pay forward, it's wisdom and knowledge. He wrote an awful lot of these to the famous Dark Lady of the Sonnets. I'm not going to go into that. That's another day's webinar. But he also was not a simple romantic. He was a realist. And he did some wonderfully romantic things with sonnets. For instance, let us take Romeo and Juliet. I think I've discussed Romeo and Juliet on the level of the five senses, and how Romeo first, he sees her, he hears her, he gets close enough to go through all the other senses, to touch her, to smell her, and then eventually with the kiss to taste her. So his awareness of her has that wonderful set of five physical senses. But there's something else that happens when he first meets her. And what Shakespeare does is something exquisitely romantic. That the first conversation between Romeo and Juliet, and they're going to talk an awful lot in a couple of scenes' time. And well, when I say they, I mean she, because she never shuts up. But in this first moment, something quite magical happens. Shakespeare has them share a sonnet. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this, my lips two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a gentle kiss. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands, the pilgrim's hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss, and so on. But this first exchange between them is a sonnet. It is a perfect poem. It is the one moment in the play where something beautiful in itself happens. It is this beautiful meeting of two very young people who, for the first time in their lives, fall truly in love, or at least what they believe to be love. It is romantic love, it is tied up with desire and so many other things, but it is young, it is innocent. And Shakespeare exemplifies the innocence of it by providing that first piece of dialogue as a sonnet. It's quite exquisite. But he wasn't just romantic. And in fact, a lot of his imaginings, I think, were almost anti-romance in the conventional sense of it. What we might describe as the sticky, icky daytime television romance. I think that he was also a realist, a complete realist when it came to love and marriage, but particularly love and who one loves. And look at that earlier poem about you love me in spite of what I am. You love me in spite of my imperfections. You love me that way, and so much that way that nobody else's opinion matters, because you love me good, bad, and indifferent. I'm often asked, what's my favorite sonnet? There is no contest. My favorite sonnet is Sonnet 130. Why? I always imagine, when I read it, I have this picture of Shakespeare sitting in sort of Shoreditch at the Mermaid Tavern, having a few beers and with his pen and thing, writing notes. And all around him are these young poets. And they're all writing these wonderful love poems to these goddesses that they think they're in love with. So pretentious. And I think I always imagine Shakespeare saying, hang on a minute. All that nonsense you're writing. My mistress I are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snows be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I've seen roses, damask red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go, my mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. I think that is one of the greatest love poems ever written. And I say that simply because that I believe. Because rather like the earlier poem, you love me in spite of my imperfections. You love me for who I am, not what I've done. You don't hate me for what I've done. You don't judge me for what I am. You just accept me and love me, and you make me better because of your love. And this is the counterpoint that, to his mind, and in the most perfect sonnet form and shape, with everything in it, the alliteration, the specificity, and the repetition, he is describing a marriage of true minds. All of these, they're all thematic. They all can be found to link. And yet, it's also the fourth, not necessarily essential factor, but an important factor within itself. It's funny. And it takes the true poet to be able to not merely make his point, but to even laugh at himself while doing it. And there is one other that I find delightful and amusing. Now, the last production that we staged was, for those of you who were there, Midsummer Night's Dream. And when I was doing the preamble chat before we began rehearsal, I read a sonnet to the cast because I wanted them to understand that as we went through the rehearsal process, we would be addressing what we might call the essential fabric of the subtext of these lovers who were constantly changing back and forth. And the final sonnet in the canon, I think, is Shakespeare's dirty joke, if you like, about the nature of love and how it relates to sex and desire, lust. And I absolutely adore this. A little love god, lying once asleep. Now we know the little love god is usually Cupid. A little love god, lying once asleep, laid by his side his heart-inflaming brand. Whilst many nymphs that vowed chaste life to keep came tripping by. But in her maiden hand the fairest votary took up that fire, which many legions of true hearts had warmed. And so the general of hot desire was sleeping by a virgin hand disarmed. This branch she quenched in a cool well by, which from love's fire took heat perpetual, growing a bath and healthy remedy for men diseased. But I, my mistress thrall, came there for cure. And this by that I prove, love's fire heats water, water cools not love. Now, if anybody needs me to explain what that's all about, send me an email and I'll tell you. I'm not going to say it here and now, but if you don't get the obvious meaning behind that particular piece of writing, heaven help you. But this is my point. These sonnets, we started from a religious perspective. We come down to something that is, shall we say, much more earthy. But the chain throughout the sonnets, what makes them the perfect poem, is that by following those somewhat strict rules, first of all, 14 lines, iambic pentameter, always finishing with the rhyming couplet, is a discipline. And once you establish that discipline, that the corral of you can do whatever you like within it, but you can't go outside those borders. And if you use specificity of word and adopt alliteration, repetition, lists, all of those images, and provide yourself this mechanism, this toolbox for writing. And if you have the imagination and know precisely what you want to say, by writing in a sonnet form, you can, and by using words, by using sounds, and again, alliteration, repetition, by using the sounds to demonstrate the thought, you can create practically perfect poems in every way. Where those books of religion attempted through the use of poetic form to explain the purpose of creation, Shakespeare's sonnets seem to use a similar form to explain the purpose of life, of living, of purity, of corruption, and consequently, of love. And that is my sermon on the sonnets. So, thank you all. I've got a couple of announcements. As usual, I want to thank the Allegheny Foundation for sponsoring this year's series of webinars. Bless you. Thank you. The fact that they've done that, of course, we are still always in need of support. And if you can, as my usual weekly appeal, and many of you do respond to it, every donation really does help. As I say, we're building towards coming back for our 25th anniversary season, which will be starting in the fall. Every donation does matter, and no matter how small it is, and even if you can only afford $5 or $10 or whatever your equivalent currency may be, that is wonderful. If you can afford it once a month, that's even better. If you can afford it once a week, my heart will burst with joy. But every dollar does count. So anything you can donate, no matter how small it may be, please consider it, sending it to us. Go to our website and you'll see the donation button on the website. Next month, June, we will be doing our regular Bloomsday celebration, which last year we brought online, and it was so popular we're going to keep it online. So there will be readings from James Joyce's Ulysses on Bloomsday a month from now. We are also looking for sponsorships for that if anybody is interested. In Pittsburgh, Hepatica florists are going to sponsor us, which is wonderful. We're getting a Bloomsday sponsorship from the best purveyors of blooms in Pittsburgh, which I think is rather wonderful. So thank you to Hepatica. If you want to be a sponsor for that, please reach out. Marketing@pittheatre.org is one way of doing it. If you want to get information about how, there it is, marketing@pittheatre.org. And don't forget there are 2 T's. You can find out there how to be a sponsor, which is really wonderful. Now, next week, we're going to have the first of a couple of discussions with a very remarkably talented Pittsburgher, Tomei Cousin, on the whole event of what is described as the Harlem Renaissance. I'm not going to tell you any more about that. There will be information going up. It's going to be very interesting. Tomei will be with me next week, and I think 2 weeks after that. So it's going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be very informative, very educational. and we think rather important. So we hope you'll join us next week. Anybody who has any questions, doubts, worries, fears, or condemnations of what I've said, always send an email. I'll always respond to it. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope the weather improves for all of us. In the meantime, take good care, keep wearing your masks, get your jab if you haven't had one, look after yourselves. Bye now.